Hello and welcome to the 8th and final module. I just want to take a moment to thank you for being with us throughout this year. In this final module, we're going to take a step back and look at some of the different tools and strategies that we've discussed throughout the year. We're going to talk about how we can use these different data in the process of triangulation, also termed converging evidence, to see how we can put these different sources together within our comprehensive evaluations, make accurate disability determinations, and accurately document the educational impact. So we're going to go through some case studies showing how we can do that. And then we're going to end the day with some different resources that you can use when you're writing up these summaries and developing your IEPs. So throughout this semester, we've been looking at all different types of assessments. We started with norm reference assessments, then we moved on to different types of criterion reference assessments, talking about the importance of academic standards and questionnaires and observations, and then moving into language samples. I really appreciated all of these conversations and this deep dive into these areas. However, sometimes when we focus so much on these individual assessments, we start to not be able to see the forest from the trees. So we want to make sure that we take a step back and that we're really not losing sight of what we're ultimately after, and that is the comprehensive evaluation. How all of these different sources of data work together to help us move forward in our evaluation. So you may say, John, that's enough with the imagery, that's enough with the forest and the trees, just show us what we should do, show us on real materials we use. So that's what I'm going to do. We're going to go through some case studies and we're going to revisit some of the key tools that we have available to us. And in case you're not familiar with these tools, so we know that all of the districts we're working with really promote the use of these tools, and they can be found right on the DPI website. So if you're not using these, be sure to go on the website and find them. I assume most of you are. So we'd like to spend a bit of time talking about some of our favorite stories that we've heard from you and talk about how they really illustrate comprehensive evaluation. So I wanted to start off by talking about students with high-level needs. And one thing that we observe with students with high-level needs is that looking at a rubric like this, we tend to see most of our data showing this substantial impact, right? If we give a norm reference test, they're going to score low. When we look at comparison to age expectations and grade expectations and norms, it's going to be substantially impact. So where do we go from there? So one thing we can do is look at some of our more descriptive standards-based assessments. Throughout our time together, we talked about academic standards and the WEMLs. This is a tool we introduced in our language sample module. So this is standards-based rubric that can be used when looking at conversational discourse or play-based discourse. So we can see, are we seeing later preschool types of communication skills like engaging in longer dialogue and making conversational repairs? If we're working with a student who has more emerging communication skills, we can look at the types of skills, the types of communication that we're observing, other types of communication like gestures. If we're working with students who have slightly higher skills, we could look at early narrative skills. So this was a rubric we put together rooted in the standards, looking at the development of some key narrative skills. So for example, if we want to look at main idea and supporting details, we can see where they are in the continuum. Are they sharing details but have minimal development of plot? Or are they able to use those details to tell a cohesive story? So in summary, for our students with high-level needs, I think those of you working with these students are already doing so much of this work, and you have great tools. If you find some of the tools that we developed useful, that's great. We really tend to focus on functioning, drawing on strengths, and really identifying those areas that can have a high impact on their ability to participate and engage with the curriculum and with their peers. Another story I really liked this semester was a story I'm going to call "Is It Language?" Maybe I'm inspired by just watching an episode of "Is It Cake?" So, with this case, the team recognized there was a problem, right? So there was no doubt that there was some sort of problem that was interfering with educational progress. The student wasn't participating, had poor grades. However, we were really unsure of what the root cause of those problems was. So this team had good documentation through observation and different types of assessments and academic records that there was a clear impact on functioning, that there was a clear educational impact. The question was, is it language? And what this team did was completed a norm reference language test and found that indeed there was a significant discrepancy, which really added a lot of value into determining the root cause, which was language. And I should add a note that this norm reference test was appropriate for the student. The clinical observation was that the student understood the task, had familiarity with the type of task. Um, no type of dialect or language spoken that would impact performance. So what we learned from this case is that there was great shared responsibility. I think that's probably the biggest thing from the beginning is the team was on board. The team provided unique insights and together recognized that there was a real problem that was impacting the student. And through that, they got excellent insights into the student's academic functioning. Through all the work we've done, we don't want to lose sight that our norm reference tests, they can have a lot of power and add a lot of value. So in a case like this, where we're trying to determine whether or not language could be a root cause, it can really add a lot of value to the comprehensive evaluation and then confirm with additional testing. And with this particular case, it was a language sample that also confirmed the presence of a language disorder and that there was a true need in the area of language. This last case is a really interesting one looking at articulation. So this was a first grade student who had some articulation errors, a low score on the Goldman-Bristow. The SLP disclosed that typically this would have been a speech kid, where there is an articulation difficulty, often work on artic, and doing follow-up testing, we do see that the student is able to communicate well and has good social emotional functioning, but we observed that there were some significant reading difficulties. So the SLP did some follow-up probing looking at initial and final consonants of the affected phonemes. And what they found is that the student, they could decode the sounds that they produced incorrectly just fine. That the decoding of these phonemes was generally intact. So looking at the speech and phonology worksheet, we see that there is a moderate impact when we look at the norm reference scoring. We see that maybe a bit more minimal when looking at stimulability and overall intelligibility. But we have this educational aspect here, right? There is a definite struggle in the area of reading. So if we think about traditional label-based thinking, I think a lot of times, in a lot of situations, this would become a quote-unquote speech kid. And if the team would think that the speech language pathologist would be the best person to see them, the traditional therapy for this would be drilling production of those individual phonemes. A traditional mindset would be, well, yeah, he has some problems, but speech is on it. He's getting special education services through speech language pathology. And then the traditional outcome is that a student like this might fall through the cracks, particularly in the area of reading. Now, what the SLP shared is they really had a more of a needs-based mindset in their meeting. So really looking at, what is the impact of the articulation? Really, what are the biggest area of needs? It's reading. What's the root cause of those needs? It appears to be more of an underlying reading disorder than, a direct causal root of the articulation difficulties. So when they had the idea of how they could best serve this student, what they identified is that they had high quality reading curriculum and high quality focused reading instruction available through a reading specialist. So taking a step back, we see the power of converging evidence and being able to get those multiple sources of data and really dig into the root cause of the students' difficulties. The SLP also shared when they really looked at this from multiple perspectives, getting people talking and conversing and really sharing their insights. She found that this was one of the most collaborative IEP meetings that she had ever had. So to summarize our time together talking about comprehensive evaluation, we're doing this to accurately make eligibility decisions and to document the educational impact. And through this process, we can really change into a needs-based mindset and do needs-based thinking to identify how we can best support our students. And another thing that we've done this year, and we hope to continue through our time next year, is to really expand that toolbox with some specific tools like some of the rubrics and standard summaries, as well as expanding our comfort and expertise with language sampling and dynamic assessment. So speaking of tools, we have one final set of tools we want to share with you this year, and Alyssa's going to talk about them. She's put together some nice materials for helping us summarize and organize this information after we all collect it. So I'll turn it over to Alyssa.
So I developed some report templates, some sample write-ups to go along with the questionnaires and the observations that we have guided you on throughout this year. So in this document, we have some examples that you can consider for writing up your information gained from the questionnaires and the observations. Now keep in mind these are not a one-size-fits-all, but rather just some examples, some suggestions. So please modify them as you see fit based on your students and based on your own personal needs. And a helpful tip is that you can copy and paste and modify the templates and then use the find and replace feature in Google Docs or Microsoft Word to replace that student in brackets with your student's name really easily. And just be sure to include the brackets in that find and replace feature. And then we also have a link here where you can click to force copy this document. So you'll have access to view it. And then if you click on this link, you'll be able to force copy and have your own copy to edit and copy and paste and do whatever you need to do. So as you can see here, we have the table of contents, and this just kind of outlines what we have. We designed some templates for all of the different questionnaires that we shared with you along with the SLS. And then we also have some options for observation too. We included some tips to help make them a bit more data driven. And then we have some examples for some of the different standards. And then just some more helpful tips and Nelson's questions within your observations. So I'm going to show you some of the questionnaire options that you could consider when you're trying to summarize your results or findings from those questionnaires. So I'm going to use the Speech and Language Standards-Based Teacher Questionnaire Elementary Language. And as you can see, we kind of have two options you could pick from. And again, feel free to do something totally different too. We just wanted to give you something to start with. So in option one, we kind of summarize what you did, which is the questionnaire. And then you'll see here, there's just kind of a brief summary of that questionnaire. Now, all of this text in blue would need to be changed and edited based on your student and the information you received. In option two, again, there's kind of that introduction to that questionnaire so your readers know what you did. And then you'll see I divided this next section into headers with those core questions in mind. If you think back to the documents that we put together at those different levels, we had core questions when determining educational impact at each of those levels. And so I used those as some of the headers to break down some of the standards. And I will say I did have some input from a Green Bay SLP, so a shout out to you for collaborating with me and kind of sparking a new idea. And I use those areas to break down the standards. And so you see we have high quality conversations, and then these are those standards that go along with that area. asking questions and seeking clarification, stories, explanations, and summaries, and then vocabulary and grammar, and social emotional. So what you could do is you could copy and paste each of those sections under areas that were identified as strength for that student, areas that were identified as mild difficulty, and then areas that were identified as moderate to significant difficulty. So you could easily copy and paste down into those sections. Now, something to keep in mind here is you are summarizing the information that you received. So this is not saying that these are things the SLP needs to work on. That will come into play as you move into your team meetings and discussions and things like that. And then I just tried to include some possible options for a summary statement. So something like overall areas of possible difficulty include, or areas of need include, or you could say something like based on team discussion, observation, and questionnaire, the following are needs. So just trying to give you some ideas for a possible summary statement to kind of pull it all together. So now that you have seen that write-up, I'm going to take option 2 and show you what that could look like if you chose to edit it and make it more individualized for your student. So here I have a Google Doc. I can easily go to edit, find and replace, and here is where I can type in student. You'll see it highlighted, and then if I want to replace it with my student's name, I can easily do that, replace all, and then you can see now all of that has been replaced with my student's name. So that's just a little trick you can use if you find that helpful. So here's an example of that language questionnaire. So I kind of summarized that Alyssa's teacher, John Heilman, completed it, and then we broke it down into some of the areas of strength that were noted. You can see I kind of kept those headers with the core questions in mind and then sorting those standards. Have some areas of mild difficulty, and then some areas of moderate difficulty. And then I just tried to include a very brief summary statement here. So based on team discussion, observation, teacher questionnaire, the following have been identified as needs. So using specific details when discussing texts and vocabulary skills, including context clues and roots, prefixes, and suffixes. So again, it doesn't mean that you as the SLP must address those needs. You're really just reporting your findings. And then when you get together as a team, you're going to triangulate and converge that data, have those discussions, and when appropriate in the process, if you're in an evaluation versus an IEP, talk about those needs and then talk about, how that might play out if you're in that IEP process. So again, this is just one example of how you might write this up. In our observation template section, we have a few tips just for you to consider to make your observations more data-driven. We have the systematic recording methods document from DPI linked. You might want to consider the type and amount of support provided in your observations. And then we also have some quick links to some of Nelson's questions that we reviewed throughout the year as well. And so these are just some tools that you can use as you're going through to work on writing up your observations. So here is that systematic recording methods table that comes directly from DPI, and we do have the direct link to the DPI document if you would like it. And then here are Nelson's questions, and this just brings us back to consider those contextual factors. So what could be modified or what supports that student in being more successful. And if you click on a certain document, it will take you directly to the Nelson's questions for that particular area. So there's a bookmark in here. This is the elementary language level 1, and you can see it brings us right to some of those final reflection questions that directly tie to Nelson's questions. So in some of our observation forms that we provided you, we have some tables that had different standards and gave you some room to write. And so after you might use one of those forms, here is what a sample write-up could look like. Now this could be kind of new or different for you. I know that when I used to do observations, mine used to be fairly lengthy and include a lot of narrative and description about what I saw, but over the years I really tried to include more data and make my process a little bit more efficient for writing up those observations. So here I have the standard that this observation relates to, so effective communication and social emotional competencies, and let's say this is for a student who has some speech sound needs. And you're completing your observation, and so again you can use that find and replace feature to insert your student's name, but I just started with, the observation was done for 15 minutes during small group work time in social studies, and I was looking at their communication effectiveness and intelligibility. And then I went on to describe how they participated in the conversation, similar to peers, even with some speech sound errors. And then I noted their level of participation in comparison to peers. So while I was doing that observation, I'm noting my students' participation as well as maybe tracking one or two other peers to see, is it similar or is there a big discrepancy? And then, maybe that student was asked to repeat themselves a couple times during their group work. So here's where you might say that they responded positively when asked by a peer to repeat themselves. So this is just one way that you could write up an observation so it's a little bit more brief, but it also contains some pretty rich information and connects directly to those standards. So it can give you some insight into that educational impact, but possibly cut down on that work time that is put into writing these up. And then here is kind of a similar example, but this time the student, when they were asked to repeat themselves, they responded negatively and they appeared to shut down and withdraw from the group for the remainder of the work time. So again, this one kind of shows like there was a little bit of that social emotional impact. And again, you're going to put this observation in that broader context, like John has kind of talked about, triangulate that data, converge that evidence, and really see what this looks like for a student. So again, we hope that you find these useful. It's a starting point, and we are certainly open to feedback, and we would like to refine and improve these over time. And just know that you can take parts that you like and edit it, make it your own, but we're just trying to provide another support for complementing our tools. You have some tools, now you have some sample write-ups, and hopefully that can help you in the process of utilizing all of these tools and then putting it into practice. Here is the application activity. We would like you to spend just a couple minutes reviewing those report templates and then providing us with some feedback. You can scan this QR code to open up the report templates, or if you look in the YouTube video description, you will also find a link directly to those report templates. Once you have the report template document open, you've spent a couple minutes just glancing through it, we have a short survey for you to complete for the application activity. I embedded the application activity survey into the training video completion survey. I know that might be confusing, but if you look in the YouTube video description below, you will see a link to the training video completion survey, and I have a QR code on the next page. Once you open that training video survey, you will fill out your name, your district, and that you watched Module 8. You'll click to the next page, and then you will see this blue box on the left-hand side of my screen appear. And it says, if your district is on Module 8, please read the next page carefully. You can then click Submit, and we will get record that you watched the Module 8 training video. And then on the next page, you'll see this message on the right-hand side of my screen. And it says, if your district is on Module 8, please read the following section. For MMSD, you're going to click there to complete your application activity survey. For all other districts, you're going to click here for your application activity survey. Now, we did this to hopefully eliminate a bunch of going back and forth between email and Google Docs and things like that. So we hope this is a little bit smoother for you. So again, here is the QR code to get to the training video completion survey, or you can look in the YouTube video description for the link. And as always, please feel free to reach out if you have questions or need support. We are more than happy to collaborate.